it's not monolith, both Black Muslim women. And I think that's a very unique experience to hold that has a lot of weight for different things. Cause, whenever something happens, you're like, is it because I'm Black? Is it because I'm Muslim? Is it because I'm a young woman? Like, what is it? And there's also the level of pressure that comes with that because I feel like you're on eggshells more than other folks and you represent so much by doing so little. So I think that has always been a really tough thing of you're trying to live your life and everybody's looking at you kind of waiting for you to mess up to be like, "Oh, that's how they are. That's how Muslims are. That's how, these Black people are," things like that.
That was PhD student and longtime policy advocate on the federal level, Ganiyat Sadiq. What she just said, there's something that a lot of people will hear, but not everyone will fully understand. The idea that you were not just living your life as an individual, but that you were seen as representing an entire community, your race, your religion, your gender, that is a pressure that is rarely talked about, but constantly felt. And for Black Muslim women in particular, that pressure is layered. It's not just racism, it's not just Islamophobia, it's not just sexism. It's all of them at the same time, all the time. And when something happens to you, you don't just ask, why did this happen? You ask, which part of me did this happen to? And that question, was it because I'm Black, because I'm Muslim, because I'm a woman, is a question that can follow you for your entire lifetime. Welcome to Injustice and Insight, Episode 3. Today's conversation is about that reality, the reality of being Black, Muslim, and often overlooked in media, in policy, in conversations about racism, and even sometimes in conversations about Islamophobia or anti Muslim hate. I'm your host, Hannan Mohamud.
Just to give some background for this whole double visibility thing, I was thinking a little bit, and it made me think of how very often racism, for it to work, it needs visibility. Not always, but very often.
That was Habiba Diallo, the author of the book Black in School. She is the inaugural winner of the Senator Don Oliver Black Voices Prize and has received other literary accolades. She is an activist in support of women's maternal health. The government of Canada has also recognized her as an outstanding woman in 2019.
It needs visibility. You need someone who presents as racialized, who is Black, who has Black skin or brown skin, who wears a hijab, who dresses a certain way. It needs that visibility. And not always. I think of names, for example, if someone sends in a resume and they have an African name or an Arabic name, that too is a kind of visibility, but it's not, I guess, as direct as, say, one's dress or one's skin color, so forth.
My name is Ganiyat Sadiq. I am a PhD student studying global governance, but a lot of my experience lies in nonprofit and advocacy. I ended up having a meeting with a politician, and I was basically advocating for the need to define anti anti-black racism versus, anti-Palestinian racism versus anti-racism. And they were like, why? Well, why can't it just fall under the same umbrella? Like it's all bad. I remember just being like, I don't remember what I said in the moment, but I think I was along the lines of how this is what it's perceived as. It's perceived that, racism, Islamophobia, any form of hatred, it's just defined and lumped together. And they think because it's lumped together, there can now be like only one strategy under there. It should kind of fall under. And this is where if you're experiencing, and I think this is it, like Canada has this one framework and this should encompass everything. And I was like, it's not the same experience. So anti-black racism, Islamophobia is not the same thing because there's going to be an experience where someone experiences Islamophobia and they're not black. And then there's going to be a time that somebody experiences racism and they're not Muslim. So I think it was you see in the policies, they try to be as encompassing as possible, and in that, just erases these intersectional identities as well.
So, to my point, racism, it usually requires visibility for it to work, for someone to direct racism or hate towards you. And now, into society where you have people who are Black and Muslim, already they have their black skin, their blackness, their brown skin as one level of visibility. And we know, unfortunately, that has been one of the bases of discrimination against Black people for centuries, just skin color, the color of our skin, right? And then, secondly, now, when you're Muslim, when you're visibly Muslim, and this one relates more so to Muslim women than to Muslim men, when you're visibly Muslim as a woman, you wear certain clothing, you wear hijab, so forth. That's another layer of visibility. And these are two bases. So, skin color, firstly, and then now dress code, hijab, clothing. Two bases that racists will use to discriminate against you. So, that is the idea of double visibility.
It's all one big thing, but I always think about it in that little Venn diagram, and the people that guess it's not the big 2, it's that little place where they intersect. That's where we get lost. So I think a lot of policymakers, because they recognize that change takes so long to get new policies and things put out, they try to fit so much under such a little title. So it's been really disheartening I mean, even now, I think now there is a definition that's being recognized for anti Palestinian racism, but for over the past, since October 7th, we've been seeing specifically anti-Palestinian racism and people just being like, hate. This is under hate. And if it's now classified under just hate, they don't have to acknowledge the how many years of genocide the Palestinians have been going through, because this is all just hate. It's just this, you know, specified thing that just started on October 7th. It's a new phenomenon that, we've never had to deal with. And I know I'm not specifically talking to the anti-Black experience right now, but I think there's so much that can be learned from, that experience that I had of trying to advocate for, no, you need to recognize this identity and understand that that it's so tied with their history, and you trying to erase that is erasing any form of solution that you could ever have or even present to yourselves. So,
There are real consequences when the law and policy treat different forms of discrimination as if they are identical. Because while racism, Islamophobia, and other forms of discrimination are connected, they are not the same in how they operate, and they are not the same in how they impact people. For example, anti Black racism has a very specific history tied to slavery, segregation, over policing, and systemic exclusion from education, housing, and employment. Anti Muslim hatred has its own history tied to surveillance, national security laws, media narratives about terrorism, and restrictions on religious expression. Anti Palestinian racism is tied to foreign policy, displacement, war, and political silencing. When you collapse all of these into one word, hate, you erase the history. And when you erase history, you erase the solution because you cannot solve a problem you refuse to name properly. And what was said earlier about double visibility is so important because discrimination often works by what people can see: skin color, hijab, clothing, name, accent. These are signals in society, and unfortunately, they can become targets. So if someone is Black, that is one layer of visibility. If someone is visibly Muslim, that is another layer of visibility. And when those two things exist in one person, the risk of discrimination doesn't just add, it multiplies. But here's the problem: our legal system still largely works in single categories: race, religion, gender, one at a time. And real people don't live single issue lives, they live intersectional lives. So when Ganiyat talks about the Venn diagram, that small space where identities intersect, she's absolutely right. That is where people get lost, and unfortunately, that is where legal protection is often the weakest, because the system was not designed with intersectional people in mind.
Muslim women in Alberta are exhausted.
It has definitely been a horrifying and traumatizing experience for the Muslim community at large.
In recent months, Black Muslim women wearing hijab in Edmonton and Calgary have been targets in a series of racist attacks. In December, a mother and daughter were violently assaulted in an Edmonton Mall parking lot. Less than a week later, another woman was attacked at a city transit station. And just last weekend, a 28-year-old woman was charged after a racially motivated assault on a teenage girl. Police say the woman yelled racist slurs, kicked and punched the girl, and removed her hijab.
the period of during COVID where there was just Black Muslim women getting targeted. And I think for me, I was just like, is nobody else seeing this? For the longest time, it just felt like, okay, we're seeing one thing happen. I'm like, Black Muslim, second thing, Black Muslim woman, third thing, okay, Black Muslim woman. And it then became on us to be like, this is now a pattern. This is now something that, we're specifically being targeted. And where is the Muslim community? Like, this is just a really strange phenomenon that happened. And the person that had to deal with the carnage of it all was other Black Muslim women of being like, "Hey, so we've now seen this pattern. We now have to share with our community. This is something to be aware of." I was invited to some event, and the whole aspect of it was advocating for speaking with different politicians and talking about how Islamophobia was on the rise. And that was the overall premise. And I was invited as someone to be like, "Hey, we're specifically talking about Black Muslim women." I said, "Bet, amazing. This is nice that I don't have to do it alone." So we pull up the first meeting, Black Muslim woman doesn't get mentioned. I'm like, "Okay, weird," considering I thought this was an event specifically talking about Black Muslim women that are being targeted. Um, the next one, I then take it upon myself because I'm like, "Oh, the person supposed to be running this meeting it's just using the blanket expression Islamophobia." And then I also am like, there's so many layers to this because now the person across from us, the politician, is seeing us as homogenous, right? He's being like, these are Muslims, they're experiencing something terrible. I'm gonna try and fix it, right? So now am I that person that now has to instigate, oh, there's a difference between me and this other Muslim. We're not experiencing the same thing. And because I was promised in coming to this event that I wouldn't have to make that distinction for us, but this is now one meeting has passed and you have not referenced the difference between me as a Black Muslim person and this person that's not a Black Muslim, wherein the majority of the people getting targeted are Black Muslim women. So that next meeting, I had to be like, hey, so I'm actually here for Black Muslim women. And I'm not the person that has to other myself from these other Muslim to now talk to this politician who's white and doesn't understand that I'm not experiencing the same thing that this person's experiencing. Not to say that that person's experience is not valid, but it doesn't reflect my lived experience either. So after, instead of, getting support within the meeting, they come up to me and they're like, "Hey, so sorry. Like, that's actually what we're here for. Like, we are here for like the Black Muslim woman." And I'm like, "Okay, then why didn't you say that? Why didn't you say that?" And I had to say it. I now had to say it. I had to other myself, and not everybody's talking in the meeting on how I was focused on the Black Muslim woman and not just Muslims, as a whole.
What this story really shows is that representation is not just about being in the room. It's about what is said in the room, what is acknowledged in the room, and what is written into policy after that room. Because you can be invited to the table, but if your reality is not named, not recorded, and not acted on, then you are present, but you are not represented. And there is a big difference between presence and representation. So the question becomes not just who is in the room, but whose experiences are being named, whose experiences are being prioritized, and whose experiences are being turned into actual policy change. Because at the end of the day, the goal is not just to be heard, the goal is to be protected.
To be someone that says you feel more comfortable with a cop around is a very unique experience that does not apply to all Muslims. And you need to be able to sit and have a conversation about that. Because I think what I've seen and what I perceive is conversations about racism within the Muslim community makes people very uncomfortable because, as Muslims, we know that it's not something that is accepted. It's very frowned upon in our religion, dare I say, haram in our religion. And it's something that is perpetuated on a daily basis, something that, we kind of sweep under the rug. It's an uncomfy topic. It's not what we do as Muslims. We care for everyone, but there's limitations to that. There's, an invisible hierarchy that exists that nobody wants to really talk about, and it makes people very uncomfortable. So I think we need people that are willing to sit in that discomfort and be like, why is it there? Because it feels like an us against them within the same community. And why is that? As the Muslim community, we need to do much better in terms of directing our energy and how we invest our time. Because I think we, as the Muslim community, see advocacy right now as too transactional for me. And I think back to this when I'm talking about, we a lot of harm can come from within the Muslim community to Black people specifically. So I know I've experienced anti-Black racism from within the Muslim community, and I think also when we're talking about advocacy and how, you know, everybody we talk about Palestine, but when it comes time to talk about Sudan, when it comes time to talk about Congo, there is this, like, "Am I alone in this?" And then now you're making me choose, "Okay, am I Black first? Am I Muslim first? Which one why do I not have to pick an identity to be like, "Okay, now I guess I talk about Congo because I 'cause I'm Black, because 'cause I'm African." But within the Muslim community, that's not being seen when we're seeing, historically, the Muslim community will donate so much money, and the most underfunded campaigns for Muslim organizations will be that are Black focused, that are African centric, that are, the Black people are seeing, specifically, and I won't quote which organization because I don't wanna give them airtime like that. But just the fact that, you know, there will be silence, and I will speak to a very real experience I had when I was working with a Muslim organization of, "Yo, y'all, we need to do something for Sudan," and they were like, they won't show up. They straight up that there no point in us investing this time because nobody will show up. Donations will not be had, and, you know, Black History Month, I think too, watching the Muslim community the past couple years now use Black History Month as like, "Okay, let's talk about Bilal and also donate to this one campaign." And it's so frustrating that external to that. And I had a conversation with someone kind of expressing this frustration as, to a very white passing Muslim man. And he said, "Well, it's not fair to expect everybody to care about everything times." And I'm like, "Okay, but why do you then expect me as, as a Black Muslim person to represent everything every single at every moment of the day? Like, do you not think that's an unfair standard of I feel like I can't now lean on my Muslim brothers and sisters to carry a bit of this weight that we're feeling as if on the day of judgment, well, we won't be all questioned the same about how, we did all these things for Palestine as we should." And I think more and more, we don't need to look at it as Palestine or Congo, Palestine or Sudan, things like that. It's Palestine and Sudan, Palestine and Congo. It's not, the sky is blue and the grass is green. It's not one or the other. And I think we live in these such objective, rigid rules within the Muslim community that it's very disappointing and disheartening when you're someone that your heart kind of lies in multiple places because of your identity.
What Ganiyat is describing is something that I think a lot of people experience but don't always have the language to explain, and that is the feeling of politically homeless, where you are a part of multiple communities, but when those communities organize, advocate, and mobilize, you don't always feel fully protected by any of them. And that is a very isolating place to be. Because solidarity, real solidarity, is not just showing up for the most visible cause or the most popular cause. Real solidarity is showing up for people even when their issue is not trending, even when it's not politically convenient, and even when it makes people uncomfortable.
And I think about the fact remove the Blackness if you want. I think even just from just a gender parity level, it's very disappointing. I can say very disappointing to witness as, you will have these big conversations about Islamophobia and there's one girl, there's one person, there's one woman there. And you will have the people that wanna be the forefront, and I'm not saying this to be like Muslim men don't experience Islamophobia. Don't think that's what I'm trying to say here. I think, though, as a Muslim community, we very much struggle with allowing spaces for Muslim women voices, period. So when we're talking about the fact that the people that are more likely to experience Islamophobia are visibly Muslim women. Why is that not represented in who we let speak, who we, center, whose voices we uplift within the Muslim community? Because I think we all know, like, the big voices of advocacy in the Muslim community and things like that, and this is not to disparage them or their expertise, but I think it is really frustrating when it's like from a gender perspective, you're not even seeing your voice. And we do these big events and, even who gets to sit in which meetings is something that I've had to go over people's heads to be like, I don't need you to get this meeting. If you're not going to let me into that space, I'm going to have to force myself into that space. So I think that was something that I experienced recently of like, I had to explain to the organizer, oh, I actually think my voice is needed. Not only that, my voice will be welcomed. I do know this politician very well because of this A, B, C, and D. And if we're trying to advocate, I should be in that aired. You're airing me. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna go around you. I'm gonna go above your head. So having to have these little power tussles within it's just so disappointing as to okay, why is it upper middle aged brown men representing the entirety of our community. Not to say you don't have that expertise, but that's not the lived experience. When we're talking about if you're talking about something that affects Muslim youth, I'm so sorry. It should be Muslim youth leading that in conversation. So I think within the Muslim community, there's also that problem of letting youth be at the forefront of what they need, this person has this much experience, let them speak with this politician. They're not as emotional, they're not as this. We need people that are emotional. We need people that have that fire and that passion that is gonna tell this person in the highest level of power, what you're doing is wrong because they have that energy to do so. So I got, alhamdulillah, the very unique experience to serve on the Prime Minister's Youth Council. And when I say I was like, "This is it. I am going to speak. I'm going to help the Muslim community." And quite literally, not one single Muslim organization really, really cared for that aspect of me now having this direct access to the prime minister. So I got invited to maybe one or two more events than I would have. I would say maybe outside of the Prime Minister's Youth Council if I didn't have it, and I would always try to be like, "I what do you want me to say?" Like, I'm not going to speak for the entirety. My what I was advocating to the prime minister was very diverse during my time on the Prime Minister's Youth Council, so I academically think Canada can do something much better. Our international assistance, terrible, needs a lot of work, and that was something I was bringing up, but I was also bringing up the fact that, a couple summers ago, there was a lot of refugees just sleeping on the street of Toronto, and it was now a tussle between Toronto and provincial who was I mean, between the provincial and the national who was gonna take care of it. So I was now trying to get expertise from, Muslim community. What should I bring up? What should I things like that. Nobody wanted to not necessarily talk to me, but see it as this is now a level of expertise that I could bring to the table. So when I'm talking about having to go around people to be sitting in a room that I already sit in without you, and I'm now like, I think the fact that you won't use me and show that I'm a part of this community with you is embarrassing for all of us. It's embarrassing for all of us because now I'm like, I'm talking about Muslim issues on a one-on-one basis, and then there's an opportunity for me to be seen with the community, and that is not being used. And when I bring it up, because maybe it's something that is an oversight, and then I bring it up that this is something we can use. This is something that I have lent in my time to on an individual basis, and now I would love to do it from a community approach. Let me in, and you're telling me no? There is beef.
This is a conversation about who is seen as an expert. Because in many spaces, policy spaces, legal spaces, advocacy spaces, expertise is often defined by title, age, and proximity to power. But lived experience is also expertise. In fact, when we are talking about discrimination, hate crimes, anti Muslim hate, racism, lived experience is a form of expertise that you cannot learn from a textbook. If you are the person being stopped at the airport, you are an expert on profiling. If you are the person being harassed on the street, you are an expert on public safety. And if you are the person being excluded from spaces, you are an expert on discrimination. But often, the people with lived experiences are invited to tell their story, not to shape the policy. They are invited to speak, but not to decide. And there is a big difference between storytelling and decision making power because representation without decision making power is not equity, its optics. I want to stay on the point about youth for a moment, because youth advocacy is often treated like it's symbolic. Like it's nice to have young people in the room, nice to have them on a panel, nice to hear what they think.
Well, hi, my name is Layla. Currently, I work at Shoot for Peace as a program coordinator and studio manager.
My name is Zaina. I am the program manager here at Shoot for Peace. I run the community impact program.
Assalamualaikum. I'm Aksha, and I'm the director of programming for Shoot for Peace.
You come into our space right now, and I tell people if you
Yeah.
look into every corner of the room, you're in a different world. You have the couch TV, no shoes, just chill at home area. You have like the workspace with the computers. You have the masala area that also has all of like our camera equipment. And then you remember you're in a photography studio. And then you have the cafe area. You have the like every we're really trying our best to accommodate to so many different like feelings and needs for the people in our community. And it's so evident when you look around our space. The first thing that came to my mind as a youth worker, as a community worker, is to always build relationships with the youth that you're working with, because at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of these youth are looking for a friend, a sibling, a older head, like of someone that they could look up to and they can talk to about all these different things that they're going through. And to also help them navigate what all this information, how they feel, what like the things about feeling like a stat or feeling like you're being misjudged or misrepresented, like teaching them how to communicate those things and having open and honest conversations. And then I would say, well, because a lot of the youth that come to their space, whether or not they start out with wanting to be a photographer or they start out with wanting to tell a story, a lot of them usually end up just falling in love with the idea of a narrative and speaking on like their truth and what they're experiencing.
What we're talking about here is not symbolism. We're talking about expertise and lived reality. Young people, especially young people who are Black and who are Muslim, who are visible minorities, are often the ones experiencing anti Muslim hate in schools, online, in public spaces, on public transit, in universities, and in the job market in very direct ways. They are navigating social media harassment, identity, belonging, and discrimination in ways that previous generations did not have to navigate in the same way. We want to highlight the work of Shoot for Peace Toronto, an organization that works with young people, particularly in Black and Muslim communities, to build leadership, mentorship, and community safety through education, community programming, and photography.
There's a lot of examples I could give. I could give, like, for example, now, mashallah, like Mahmoud, like one of our alumni, like having his Jane and Finch documentary and working with so many other youth in his community and sharing the stuff of his community members and the people around him and their own specific narratives of how they view themselves and also how they've interpreted other people's viewership of, the people in the Jane and Finch community. We do an exhibit here at Shoot for Peace where we highlight different youth every year after the month of Ramadan. The whole goal is to tell everyone's individual relationship with their community, with their Lord, and like how life looks so different for everybody, even though that we come from the same community. And I think as someone who works in this space and has worked in the community for a long time, your goal is to make sure that these youth feel important and that their stories are valued and to remind them that like you're not the only one experiencing this thing. Nothing in community work is an isolated experience, and we're supposed to teach the value of a shared experience and shared strength.
What makes organizations like Shoot for Peace so important is that they are not just reacting to harm, they are preventing harm by building community, building confidence, building leadership, and creating space where young people feel seen, supported, and valued. Because a lot of the conversation we've had today has been about discrimination, erasure, and exclusion. But prevention also looks like community programs, mentorship, safe spaces, and youth leadership. It looks like investing in young people before harm happens, not just responding after harm happens.
The most crucial effect it has is on self-esteem. When you're being erased, then how can you have self-esteem? How can you develop self-esteem and self-confidence when you don't see yourself, when you're constantly being othered? That's the word a lot of people like to use now, or in academic spaces, when you're constantly being erased, that erasure, when you're constantly being othered, then where's the opportunity to grow into a very, I guess, authentic young person, young adult, full of self esteem?
When you do that, it's also, you then also get to see and cultivate the story of like a whole spectrum of emotion. And I think that's what's also the beauty of that too. You see like stories of grief, of loss and how they've handled that or like what they struggle with, fears, hopes, dreams, like love and the relationship between like I can distinctly see images in my mind from youth exhibits of like a specific image that was around like mother-daughter relationship. Like such beautiful like art that captures those moments and validate that not that validation is needed, but
Mhm.
just like shows that all these emotions and all this spectrum of like life is here in existence.
I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of youth are very aware of a power imbalance in their life, whether it's at work, at school, at home, like whether it's when they leave their community and they're in other areas of the city. But I think when they come, especially when they experience like our mentorship and our programming, they can put a name to it. They can understand why these dynamics are in place or why it happens, or, just giving them the tools for the knowledge that they already have. And then you'll see a lot of times like people will talk and have conversations and then they're like, wow, I'm with a group of people that actually are passionate about the same things that I'm also angry about or I'm upset about. And now I have like the means to actually tell a story and us reminding the youth that your stories are important and they're allowed to be heard, and calling things out or for whatever the case may be is as important as finding a solution. Knowing there's a problem and wanting to speak about it is just as halfway point,
Mhm.
to finding a solution.
One thing that disturbs me with some of the stories that I'm hearing today around discrimination against like very little kids in kindergarten and grade one. There was one in Peel Region, Mississauga, I believe it was, a young black girl, 4 years old. You hear of police being called into the classroom.
Storytelling is a form of power because the way a community is talked about often shapes the way that community is treated by the public, by media, by policymakers, and even by the legal system. If a community is constantly described as dangerous, troubled, or problematic, then policies will be built around surveillance and policing. But if a community is understood as resilient, under resourced, and full of potential, then policies might focus on investment, education, mental health support, and youth programs. So stories don't just shape opinions, they shape policy. And what they're doing at Shoot for Peace, by having youth tell their own stories, document their own communities, and share their own experiences, is incredibly important because they are changing the narrative from the inside. They are telling young people, you're not just statistics, you are not just headlines, you are authors, you are filmmakers, you are storytellers, you are leaders.
When there's some sort of incident involving kindergarten students, there was one about a 6-year-old being handcuffed. And I said, how could an incident result in that? It makes absolutely no sense. Where are the teacher's skills, so forth? This double visibility that I face as a Black, as a Muslim. I think of it more so in the wider societal context. So very much in our day-to-day, in wider society, when we're on the street, when we're at the mall, when we're at the grocery store. But of course, it can trickle down, and it does trickle down into the school environment, because school, it's a sort of microcosm. It's just one example. It's a smaller part of wider society. Let me put it that way.
Being from Alberta is a very interesting and unique experience in and of itself. I went to a primarily white high school, and I think back then there was no word for what I was necessarily experiencing of just, feeling a little bit othered and being the only visibly Muslim person in my high school as well. It's always interesting because I think you see yourself get tokenized in this way, but you're 17, you're 18, you don't know the word tokenization.
Anti-Black racism, it plays out in many ways in our high school system through the treatment, how Black youth are treated, disproportionate use of say, disciplining or punishment when a Black student gets in trouble.
That is power too. And for a lot of young people, that kind of power, the power of dignity, the power of belonging, the power of being seen, can change the entire direction of their life. And what they just said really stood out, especially to me, because the idea that community work is not always the cutest on paper, it doesn't fit into neat funding proposals or neat policy frameworks, but it is real and it is human and it is necessary. Because before a young person can become a filmmaker, a photographer, an advocate, a lawyer, a PhD student, a policymaker, an author, They need to eat, they need to be safe, they need to feel like they matter. And that's the kind of work that goes unseen, but it is the foundation for everything else.
But I think for one, I don't think the academically in Canada specifically, it's been studies as much the impacts, first of all, of Islamophobia, anti-Black Islamophobia as well too. I think academically, the impacts of that needs to be studied as to just the trauma that goes with experiencing Islamophobia. I think more and more I meet people that are like, our age, and then we talk about just this horrendous things that we went through as high school students, and then we're now like 25 and we don't know why we feel so weird about our Muslim identity. And I'm like, well, because you were called a terrorist every day from like ages 16 to 18 as you were going through high school. Like, I feel like that's bound. That'll do it, And, we are now doing all these things and we're seeing the turmoil that people face.
How Black Muslim students face this or the consequences of this double visibility in educational spaces, it means that sometimes, without even having the chance to present yourself, without people, I guess, taking the time to know you for who you are as a human being with ideas, learning about your personality, learning about your ideas, they can sometimes just make assumptions about who you are, about how you speak. Maybe they assume that you speak with an accent, like a non Canadian accent, just based on how you present, right? Based on these things that are beyond your control. And in particular, what's really beyond your control for Black and Muslims is the Blackness part, actually, in terms of when we speak of visibility. Yeah, so that's how Black Muslim students face this in educational spaces. And we must be so aware of the power of media and what that has done to, I guess, make Black Muslim students more visible and not in a good way. The negative portrayals in the media, stereotyping, things like that. The portrayal of Islam to be a backward religion, the idea that Muslim women are in need of saving, and so forth. So those are some of the ways in which it plays out and some of the factors that influence it. I just spoke of media.
I would say it's so important for the script to be flipped because it's the same people that are being written about and being spoken about that are absorbing their own narratives from other people's perspectives. So to know, like, as a youth and as a youth worker, the life that you live, the community you love, the things that you value, and the way you see it as such, like, an important aspect of your life, but then to see it in the world as misrepresented or as devalued or as not as taken care of, you tend to like absorb that information and internalize it. And it even affects how you see yourself in your community. So it's so important for the people that see the love and to see the beauty that like is happening right in front of them to share those stories and to have pride as to where they come from. Because when a lot of the youth, when they leave their communities and they leave the places that they're comfortable in, um, it's hard for them to share and to not be challenged with these negative narratives. So it's so important for them to know that there's power in their voice and there's power in speaking like your truth to the world.
And now, particularly for Black students and Muslim students, those feelings, particularly the negative feelings, are often compounded by what happens in society. When you see the assassination of George Floyd, of Mike Brown, Tamir Rice, may all of their souls rest in peace, Renisha McBride, when you see all those stories. And again, just very direct local example for us as Muslim Canadians when you know of what happened in Quebec in 2017, the Quebec Mosque massacre, the Muslim family from London, Ontario, the Asfal family. You know, Muslim students, Black students, they have to carry these burdens, these pains, these sorrows with them into school, right? While still having the same goals as their other peers, the goal of learning, of thriving academically, and then getting out of there, graduating and moving on. My book, Black in School, it's a collection of diary entries that I kept while I was in high school. So it's my reflections at the time, my reflections going through high school as a young Black woman. Mostly it had to do with race, racial identity, so forth. But of course, when I show up, I always show up as my full self. So young, Black, African, Muslim I think we also need to think a little bit about what we choose to celebrate in school, what we choose to recognize. Again, going back to Remembrance Day, I remember when I was growing up, going through school, the Remembrance Day assemblies, there was no discussion of the contributions of Black people, whether here in North America to the world wars. We think of the Nova Scotia Number 2 Battalion. So whether the contributions of local Black communities or the contributions of Black people from around the world, so in Africa, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, Papua New Guinea, those places, we often forget about Black peoples in those places. But anyway, what their contributions were to the world wars. So every time I participated in those Remembrance Day assemblies, I did feel a little awkward. And then as I grew older and I had better understanding of these things and I had the language to sort of articulate some of my feelings, then it made me wonder, okay, what are we remembering and who are we remembering? And I remember in grade 2, and I share this in the book, when I shared one of my connections to Remembrance Day assembly through a relative, so like a grand uncle type relative. One of my teachers, it was an aftercare teacher at school, she said, no. She said, no, you didn't, basically, because she didn't think that Africans had any part in those wars. That was her ignorance, she just didn't know. And so she basically denied my own connection to all of that. So when we speak of erasure, these are some of the things. What do we celebrate? What do we recognize?
We think about like power in itself. And when we learn about the concept of power, sometimes it's only seen by those like who are in positions of it. So like in the stakeholders or in people that are in government or people that have money. And I think when I think about power, it comes from like the power to be able to tell that story or recognizing that power for yourself. So when we think about youth and we think of people in our communities, inherently those in the communities don't think they have that power. Being creative and taking up these spaces, as we like to say, is a way for us to reclaim that power for ourselves, whether that's in a photo or in a video or in any mode of creation that we choose, so that we reshape the idea of what power is and that power does live in our communities and within ourselves. So that's what I feel is so important, especially within the camera, especially within storytelling, because it brings back that like instance of power, the knowledge of power back to those who may seek it, but also seeking that within ourselves.
When we do host events in our workshops and we talk about things that we do, people are always like, "You guys do this? You guys have this? What the heck? Like that's so random." Like, but it's like we know what makes sense for the people that we serve. But it's like you go somewhere else that might not have it, but we know that like if we do this one little thing, it'll make the worlds of a difference. So our approach to everything is very just like as human as possible and as
Mhm.
like honest and true as possible. It's not the cutest on paper. Someone else might not see it as the biggest necessity, but even the idea of having an open access fridge, you don't have to ask. You can just come in and grab and go with no shame. You can walk into the space, take a nap as like as a youth, play some video games, and go home.
Mhm.
Like you don't. It's there's not a lot of permission that's needed. Like this is supposed to be like just a space for you to come in and it's immediately yours. And I think one of the biggest things is if you're a community worker and you're trying to serve the community, you want people to ask as little permission as possible for them to feel safe in your space. You don't want to, as a youth, you don't want to always be asking for everything all the time because then you feel like you're being annoying or you're taking too much or this is not yours. So you have to make sure to share in this space. I think one thing that's so important is that you don't have to ask. Like this is evidently yours. I feel like we're as people who were born and raised in the community have had our own issues. We know that like yes, storytelling is important and these narratives are important, but it's like it's the problems in these stories that are the main issues as to why these youth are seeking support and to tell a story. So especially when once you graduate from like having you run a workshop out of just a room to now in a space, and now youth are coming here to hang out because, they want to eat lunch. They don't have food to go home to or to buy lunch to. They have nowhere to hang out after school. They're having issues with so many other things in their life. As a community worker, you know that like the minute you build a relationship with the youth or with a community, all the other barriers just start to come to life, and we've dealt with them ourselves. We know what they are firsthand, and so it can be really frustrating sometimes when you know that there are other issues that you'd love to mend or love
Mhm.
to support. But because you're either boxed in a certain creative field or you can only do certain things with restricted money, it's like, yes, I want to help it, like teach a child how to like take pictures and do these things and share their narrative. It's like I also want to help them with whether it's academics, whether it's, food shortage, or whether it's with like, lack of access to so many different things, employment. kids can't come to programming because they have to support their family with childcare, all these different things. So I think as community workers, it's very aware and apparent to us that there's so many other underlying issues that we'd love to support youth in, but one, it's not feasible. Two, we don't really have all the supports and access to do so. And the track is like you want to be the hero of so many things just out of the love of your heart, but it's not realistic.
I'm gonna quote a Scandal line of, like, "You have to work twice as hard to get half of what they have," but I think that's how I was ingrained to move, and I think it's very much an immigrant experience of, you know, how much you have to work despite all this bullying that happens and all this, name calling, and now that, I always refer to mostly to, like, my high school experience because it's just a tumultuous time, and now when you look back at it and these are now people that, you interact with, and they might not remember how they made you feel about being a Muslim, but, you very much remember, and now they're your peer, and now they're your colleague, and now they're someone that, you interact with on a daily basis. So, I think just proactive approaches need to be taken by doing that kind of research and specifically community-based research, because I think how we perceive it as, I moved here when I was 6 years old. I moved to Canada when I was 6 years old. So I have, I think, a lot more audacity and, like, my rights than my parents who moved here as grown adults and, fully functioning adults where they had a whole different ecosystem that they had back in Nigeria, and they kinda adjusted to here of, just fit in, just do what you need to do to thing, and I'm like, "No, that was racist, that was da da da." I'm fight everybody. We have that perspective, so I think even just doing that generational community-based research of how things, my parents will sometimes describe their early experiences of when we first moved here, and I'm like, "That was, like, we could win a class action lawsuit. Like, what? That was insane that you went through that." So, I think we as a community need to invest the time for people to really do that so that we can understand how we've been impacted, and from that solutions can grow. Because I think we don't even have the full scope of the impacts of anti-Black racism, of Islamophobia that we experienced through those formative years.
And that documentation, that phase is already in motion.
So, what inspired me to write the book, to have it published, so forth, was the need to share those experiences with the world, with wider society, with Canadian society, for learning and also as a form of confirmation, if you will, for other Black people, young Black youth going through high school, going through our Canadian educational system. So, in my book, I speak quite a bit about Remembrance Day assemblies, what that meant to me, how I felt as a Black student attending those Remembrance Day assemblies, assumptions around Canadianness, who is Canadian, and very often some of those assumptions, unfortunately, they get applied to Black students in Canadian schools, most of whom are born in Canada.
Let's be honest, there's a lot of money out there, whether it's from the government or billions of dollars worth of funding. There's funding that's being held by charities and foundations that's going to other established organizations, oftentimes non racialized, non Black led.
There's not a lot of supports for especially grassroots organizations or individuals who are doing the work without the money that may not have the capacity as well. So I think even another aspect of like what's a barrier is like the capacity building aspect of it. So simple things of like building a team or like training your team to work with racialized communities, right? But I feel like when there are organizations across the city, if we're looking at it at a smaller range, not even across Canada, there are a number of organizations who are doing a lot of the work but are not getting the same results. As in, they're not having the same access to funding as well. So if there's like 1 or 2 grants that are coming out, you have over 100 organizations applying to 1 grant, and then there's no more resources for them. If someone doesn't get the grant, what happens next? Then their organization kind of fizzles out because they don't have like the support there.
We need foundations to actively take efforts to understand who the organizations are, being a bit more transparent about that process too of how you fund different people. And there's always like underground ways of like trying to establish those relationships with foundations and with charities, but it's difficult for for
Mhm.
Black-led organizations or Indigenous-led or racialized-led organizations to understand how that works, to get some sort of in, and then to be able to navigate those very confusing bureaucratic processes.
A lot of the work that's being done in the city or across like the province is more so like informal. There's no paper trail of like receipts. There's no paper trail of like having the like surveys, forms, photos. They just do it from our heart and because we like it. From like my own perspective of going to these grants is you have to prove what you've done in the past. So that not having that paper trail in itself is a barrier because then you're like, I've done this work for 10 years, but I have nothing to show for it. I think when we think of even community work, it is a lot of like social work aspects of it. But not a lot of people that are in this field have a social work background. I myself come from a population health background where I work more so where I'm more so looking at like the research or like social determinants of health and stuff like that. So but then I end up becoming a case manager or doing case management work. But it ends up being a larger barrier than just the funding. Then it ends up becoming burnout. Then it ends up becoming how people perceive community work. So
Like, I can think of one example of a program like our Abaya sewing program, which has a wait list of more than 400 people, and that's just because we stopped accepting more people on the wait list. And to like, where exactly would that fit in existing grants?
One positive thing that I think I should note in terms of, I guess, change or things improving, there's more visibility now. I think there's a lot more visibility now. I think people are more confident to speak up and to share some of these issues. Social media has definitely helped. I think the work of activists and scholars such as my mother, Afua Cooper, I think some of the longstanding work that they've been doing for decades has really given people confidence. It's given a lot of confidence. So in that regard, I think things are improving, even if just a little bit.
the priorities are not just one size fits all based on like what's needed in that moment. I think now more than ever we need more innovative, more creative outlets to kind of heal or bring community together. So when we're thinking about how funding is given or how funding is found in itself, it is interesting to see how we can reshape it into something that's more asset based and looking at like what's available in the community
Yeah.
and pouring into that and empowering back to that aspect of power, handing the power back to the community to
Mhm.
choose what is needed and how do we support those causes as well.
I think this shows us the danger of having that one representative for an entire community that is so diverse and, within it of itself, work needs to be done. And then now we're public facing as to like, what do we actually want? And we're trying to speak to, Canadian officials, things like that. But within our community, have we taken the time to really work on that of what is it that we need as a community that's representative of the community in its entirety?
Throughout this episode, we've talked about many things. We talked about intersectionality, what it really means to live at the intersection of being Black, Muslim, and a woman. We talked about visibility, how visibility can make you a target, but also how visibility can become power. We talked about policy and how, when policy is too general, the people at the intersection get erased. We talked about representation and the difference between being invited to speak and being invited to decide. And we talked about solidarity and how solidarity should feel like weight being shared, not weight being added. And finally, we talked about youth, not just as the future, but as leaders right now. And we talked about community, the real everyday work of making sure people have food, have space, have dignity, and have a place where they belong. And maybe what this episode really comes down to is this: justice is not about fighting what is wrong, it's about building what is right.